Well, hello, lovely listeners, and welcome, viewers. So, today on my podcast, I have the wonderful Patrick Sakutombo. I've said that right, Patrick, have I?
Well pronounced, well
Thank you,
pronounced.
thank you, thank you. Patrick came into my world probably a couple of months ago now. It was another podcast I'd uploaded, and it was Dave Silver talking about promissory notes and also talking about silver. And Patrick put a comment on there, which intrigued me. And so I reached out to him and we started talking because, as some of you are aware, I'm having my own legal battles myself with my own challenges. And Patrick, instantly, I felt like this was a guy that knew his shit. And so I wanted to talk to him. Um, and I was right. And we've had a lot of conversations over the last 2 months with Patrick helping me diligently and selflessly. So I want to thank you for that, Patrick, before I properly introduce you. Um, so Patrick is a visionary advocate for education, equity, and systemic transformation. He is the founder of iRise Nation, and he has pioneered a movement which is dedicated to empowering individuals through knowledge and fostering grassroots engagement to address societal challenges. And he has transitioned from a formal business orientated leadership role. He now works on more hands on with communities and bridging gaps basically in education and awareness. So, iRise Nation, which has now become a platform for meaningful change and offering educational initiatives like the iRise Academy. And these programs focus on providing individuals with the tools and the knowledge to help them navigate the complex legal, social, and economic systems, whilst emphasizing clarity and empowerment. And it's so easy because I've like been dabbling in this world for a long time, but didn't want to get into it, didn't understand it, haven't got a left brain, don't get it. And you want somebody to just do it for me, please, just do it for me. But that doesn't help. And I basically thrust myself into the frigging deep end over the last few months, and I've had no choice. I'm either going to sink or swim. And Patrick is a massive advocate of becoming self sufficient. He wants to get this knowledge out there so other people pay it forward and it spreads and it spreads and it spreads. And people start to understand who they truly are and what is truly right. Um, and yeah, and so iRise Nation's mission is firmly rooted in advocacy, not in the provision of regulated legal or financial services,
Good
but
point.
ensuring that the educational offerings remain accessible and compliant with applicable laws. And you've got a deep commitment to ethical leadership, transparency, and respect for diverse perspectives. And I've experienced that myself with Patrick. He continues to inspire change makers and foster a sense of empowerment in individuals worldwide. This is Patrick. This is iRise Nation and iRise Academy. Welcome. Thank you so much. I know you've had a shed load on the last few weeks, so I appreciate your time today. Bad time to pick your drink up.
No, I want to thank you as well. And, because as I say, we all put ourselves forward to learning and engagement in the proper processes
Mm.
as to how the system works. And, it's only in your own faith that you've chosen to sort of walk down this pathway. So thanks for committing to it and following through with what, sort of transforming possibly where your mind was to how it's transitioning as we speak properly.
Yes. Oh yes. It's difficult. I don't like it, Patrick, but but I feel more secure having you in my corner. That is for sure. And I can't advocate that enough. Anybody that's listening that's on a similar path that feels like they're sinking and knows damn well they haven't got enough knowledge, I highly, highly recommend reaching out to Patrick and understanding more about what he does. Before I go any further, remember to like, share, and subscribe, people. I keep forgetting to say that. So Patrick, thank you for being here, and I would love to know because all of our calls have been centered pretty much on me and my issues, and so I know a little bit about you and your story, but not enough. So I'm intrigued, and I know the viewers and the listeners will be as well.
Mm.
Where have you come from? What is it that got you to do what you're doing today? Because I know you used to be in the business world.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I want to know more about, Patrick from old and any pivotal moments that got Patrick to where he is right now.
Really good start, I guess. I think for most people, they would probably start with where they were born and how they grew up and all of that, which really does shape, nature, nurture debate of how we formulate who we are. And, I wasn't born in the UK, and I was actually born in Zimbabwe, in Africa.
Nice.
Um, Lovely place, uh, geographically speaking. But we'll try not to be too politically motivated in this conversation. But
Okay.
um, yeah, I mean, the reason I say most people would start from that place in description is because I actually first recognize each individual as the sentient being that they are. And so my starting point to me is the recognition of the formulation and way in which I arrived into this plane of existence. And I attach so strongly to that because um, the stories that I've heard from not just directly involved from my parents and my grandparents, but also from others who understand how, difficult it was at the time I was born. Um, it sort of shapes a really good picture to other things that I'll probably elaborate on later. But at the time I was born in the very late 70s, it was a time of transition. It was a time from going from Rhodesia to Zimbabwe and the independence movement. And in that time, there was so much heavy um, warfare that is not sort of used in modern day as much. It's called guerrilla warfare, of which you'd have so many people fighting um, that you wouldn't necessarily know who was the people who were presently fighting the opposition because they would live just as much as you would find in stories about World War One amongst the people themselves, and then be sheltered by people who were in the community.
Hmm.
And in that time period, my mother and my grandmother were both together at that time. My father wasn't actually positioned at the home on the evening where this particular event occurred, where they were propositioned by someone who said, "Hey, we know that uh, my uncle who was in the army, guerrilla warfare at the time, was coming back home." And so they made sure and said, listen, make sure you're there on that night. And on that night, an incredible moment happened whereby somebody far away, a minister, and I say a minister, he was actually the founder of a place for children who have been abandoned. And essentially, he had a epiphany and a dream, a vision, whereby it was important for him to let my father know that my mother should be moved to that facility immediately. And in them doing so, they did so without question of that demand. He got on the phone, he was like, listen, I think there's danger. Something is about to happen. We're not sure what. And I believe when my mum and my mother actually got transport to go there before my father could meet them there, they encountered the most heaviest rainstorm. And in Africa, it's not like here. Here we have four different types of rain. You got sleet, you got, drizzle, you got that misty kind of rain, and then you've got heavy rainfall. But in Africa, it's usually either very hard or nothing at all. And that particular night was fearsome amongst most. And they traveled, got there safely, only to find that my uncle was never the one to actually be turning up. And on the family land where they left, there were dead animals that had been killed, and people had intentionally been seeking out to uh, plot a murder. And so it became clear only when they spoke to my uncle not long later that actually um, he was never intended to come home, and the people who'd informed them he'd never met at all, and they
Right.
had sinister intentions. So I think because of that emotion and the adrenaline in the body and my mom's body, I think that probably encaptured a little bit of something in me, because all my life I'm always like, what's going on? I'm always very aware of what's happening. I'm very in tune with the, environment around me. But yeah, I didn't actually grow up in Zim, and that there's many reasons for what happened that night because of the family lineage, in terms of its royal lineage and connection to the royal family, I guess, by bloodline, and the things that we'd sort of been, I would say, ingratiated into that bloodline through services of my forefathers, grandfathers, and great grandfathers. So um, coming here to Britain, probably at 2.5 years old, um, I only have a recollection probably from around 3 years old ish going into creche. And I remember being told that, I was there for approximately 3 months in creche, and didn't speak to anyone. And after 3 months, suddenly, I just spoke perfect English. It was just like that. So they were very
Wow.
surprised. Yeah. And yeah, so I grew up here. I grew up in South London, most of my life in South London. And, it was a bit of an experience because, that's all I know now, really, mainly. And, I do know Zimbabwe. I'm very much in touch with people back home, but predominantly I know England really, really well, moved around, know it very well. And so there's been a number of moments in my life throughout growing up that have really shaped who I am today. Principally, you always have that school bully
Yeah.
thing, and it depends how you challenge it. Depends on how you challenge it that shapes who you are. Because we've got our formative years, don't we, up until about 7 years old. And there were moments. I think what was it? It's Singlegate Primary School in Collier's Woods. I think it's still there, but it's called something else now. It's now an academy by Collier's Wood Station, uh, opposite where I learned to ride a bike. And I remember this kid had me in a headlock and he was fighting me. And all I could think in my mind, because the way that I think is very, I'd say it's a bit geeky, right? Even though I never really was like that up until probably, you know, I'd say up until maybe in my 20s, that's when I became more serious. Because before that, I was never really serious. But I chose in that moment of challenging this bully and saying, you know what, you don't seem very intelligent. What you're doing is a bit daft, right? You're a bit daft. Why would you be trying to bang my head when actually the reason why you're trying to do that is because I've just told you that, what you're doing is not very nice to somebody else. Why would you then, perpetrate hate against me for telling you that? Surely your mum's told you that, or dad's told you that, or teacher's told you that. And in my mind, I was already knowing there's no such thing as Christmas. So, kids, if you're watching, sorry, but there's no such thing as Father Christmas. And he hated me for that. And I said, you shouldn't be picking on that kid. And there's no rewards or anything like that. Christmas and all that stuff is a load of rubbish. So he had me in a headlock. And my point is, my challenge to that was, and it always has been, of just intellect, of actually, you know what, you're not that smart.
Mm.
And I'm not going to start to have a fight with you or argue with you when you're not really of the intellectual capacity to sort of sway your mind anyway. Um, but yeah, bring it on. And I guess I took that with me. And I think I always then championed other people who were in a position of being challenged and sort of oppressed by others for no fault of their own. I think that's how some of my good friends would put it, is I've always been there for them whenever they've had people who've tried to mug them, people who've tried to mug them off when it comes to business contracts and things. And yeah, that's kind of what I've always sort of, it's always spurred me on to be that
Mm.
kind of person. It's not necessarily easy because, if you're an empathic person who senses other people's uncomfortability or sense of, fear in situations, then you typically are, too generous, too kind, too trusting when people bring forward a story to you. And so that can easily be cases in which, you get manipulated. And I guess those are the moments that really transform me. So
Yeah.
probably from 26 after, getting married and, you know, being duped into, thinking somebody actually is being honest with you and truthful, only to find that they're not, was a shock because I always thought marriage would be permanent and for life. And those moments really, really did shape me. I remember um, when I got married, it was just after uni. I had a really major experience where during uni, I'd done martial arts growing up, which my dad had sort of made us do growing up. I have a brother, his younger sibling by about 6 years or so. And he was made to go into martial arts. And I used to tease him about, you got to go martial arts. Are you Jackie Chan? Yeah. Doing the big brother stuff. But then my dad heard me and he was like, right, you're going as well. So I went. And as usual, if I'm going to do something, I have to really put everything in. So I did it. I think I was black belt by 17, just before my birthday. And this is a mixture of Shotokan karate, Shaolin, and jiu-jitsu. And they had to give me two tests because they said, well, if you're passing now, but you can't afford the black belt, or my dad couldn't pay for the black belt at the time, you'll do another test, and that'll be the adult one in the January time, February time or so. So I did, and that was quite an experience. But in order to maintain that, I had to train for 2 years before being allowed to do the first dang, second dang, third dang, which is now with weapons. And in uni, I trained it. And when I trained other people in it, what happened was we had a newbie come in, I think in my second year, because I went to two unis, Cheltenham and then Manchester, which Manchester was actually in Warrington at the time, Warrington College, but Manchester University course. And he smashed my knee on the ground off the mat, and the concrete ground literally obliterated all of the kneecap. And that kneecap, when it smashed, lost all the fluid behind there. And I remember the doctor's words were, if you're a professional athlete, that's it. You're in a wheelchair for life. No more football, no more basketball, nothing. That'll be it for you. You will end up in a wheelchair within 7 to 10 years. Here are some crutches, and you can go and get some physiotherapy.
Don't you just love the doctors?
I mean, not all doctors are like that, but this particular doctor definitely did. And yeah, I'd say a good 80% of doctors are taught in that line of theory, right? There's a whole thing that we can get into about that. But I just didn't believe it because I'd seen my future. This whole concept of knowing who I am in this realm means that spiritually, I've always seen myself in a sense of understanding what my role was always going to be in the world generally. And the impact that it would have is something else. It's just knowing what my directive was
How
here.
young were you when you knew that?
Oh, this is very young. I remember, so on one of the days going to creche, And I say creche, it's like more nursery than
Yeah.
creche, yeah, because creche is, before sort of 4 or 5 years old. So nursery, we were crossing the road. I remember my dad was holding my hand, and I had my cousin with me who'd come down, and he was with my dad to take me to nursery so they could go off and do something else. And at the time we were crossing the road, I looked one direction, and in one direction was all the cars in the modern era of that time. And on the right hand side, when I looked to the right, it was cobbled streets. It was all antiquated, like it was very old. And it wasn't what was actually there at the time. It was like I was seeing into another time period of realm of what things looked like. And I know that probably sounds strange to most people listening, but it's just something that happened in that moment where I saw two completely different worlds. And in that moment, all that occurred was just an extreme deep sense of knowing that the world wasn't the way it should be. And then from then on, because my parents always made me every Saturday I would spend in the library, they would go to work. They had difficulties balancing their work-life balance. Being young and here in the UK, they had to do as much work as possible in order to maintain, a mortgage and whatever else they had to pay. Um, and so I spent a lot of time in the library. And what I noticed was a lot of the books that they bought, the encyclopedias and everything else, which they made me rewrite in my own words. So it just impatted on my brain. And even the drawing of the maps, knowing all the world cities, the outline of every country, all those things. I noticed that all the books I was reading were different to ones that were being introduced in school. And when I would go to the library, some of them were being eradicated. So what was in the books that I'd been reading began to change. And it was just becoming more and more evident throughout life, just generally in everything I did, that the world really isn't what it should be. And
Wow.
something has changed and it's being changed as we speak. And that's what's everyone's probably more experienced now in the this last 4 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, none of that surprises me at all. You know, the whole vision that you saw, you know, at such a young age, you're a lot closer to source and you're a lot more open to that sort of thing. Um,
Mm,
and the fact that you so vividly remember it, and then the fact that you're being made to read these books and rewrite, you know, put it in your own words or whatever, and then you're noticing that it's different in schools. And I mean, that's quite a thing because obviously we know that history's been rewritten. We know how
mm,
terrible the education system is today, and I feel so sorry for parents that have got kids in the education system at the moment. I think when my boy's 25 now.
wow.
I think it was still okay back then.
Mm,
Um, it probably wasn't perfect, but I think it was still okay. But certainly over the last 10 years or so, it's just been eroded. So and it doesn't surprise me, Patrick. You know, it makes so much more sense to me now because your knowledge is off the scale, and I do feel like a dunce when I'm with you. I'll be honest. Yeah,
never. We're all students. They're always
we're all
there.
students, but it doesn't surprise me. And obviously, your parents, in their own challenges of juggling childcare and working, you know, gave you a gift. Really, it might have felt like child neglect at the time, but it was a bloody gift, wasn't it? You know, in terms of
100%.
what you've
That
got.
took a long time to appreciate, mind you.
Yeah,
But yeah, definitely, massive gift. Because even where I grew up in South London, you know, I used to speak like that, you know what I mean? And I love that accent, like that's how I talk, like, you know what
yeah,
I mean? And it
yeah.
was like, yeah, that's what I grew up with. And yeah, they went through so much, bless them, both of them. And I say that word, meaning, you know, I'm so grateful uh, because they actually did so much to um, sacrifice what they could have in order to put me through. Because they took me out of the, uh, standard high school, and in my year, is it the year 15? You know, the one before your GCSEs, the third year in high school. They
It's
took
year 11, isn't it? I don't
That's
know.
it, year 11, right? I'm just trying to think.
Yeah, yeah,
I was about 15.
yeah.
So, and I remember that they took me out, and I went from doing, what was it? General science or something like that, double science. That's what they
Yeah,
called it,
yeah,
double
yeah.
science. And they put me in a private school, which through my uncle, my dad's older brother, who was already here, managed to get a scholarship at one of these private schools. But I say one of these kind of private schools that I went into was very, very different. It was, four people in a class, not more than ever 6 or 8 people. Was eight was a lot. Um, 6 people. It was very close knit. These people were people, I mean, my fellow students, they were all students who had famous parents. There was, I mean, General Ford's, one of General Ford's many offspring was there. You had people who were doctors, registrars, their children were there, famous actors' children's were there, and singers' children's were there. So it was right next to uh, what's the Royal Hospital in central London that Queen Diana founded, or was the patron of? The
Ugh.
one,
It,
yeah, she went past a couple of times and was waving at us, and I remember that. Yeah. So yeah, I went to that school, and in being in that school, I remember my very first week, I came back home, and my mum and dad were looking at each other, smiling. I was like, what are you grinning at? What are you smiling at? They're like, go on, speak again. And I was and they're laughing. And I said, what's so funny? They said, oh, your voice has changed. You sound so posh. I was like, oh, I didn't realize because I do assimilate really, really well.
Yeah, I do
Before
too.
I
Yeah,
assimilate,
yeah.
So yeah, I just grasped that accent, and that was that, and that I never looked back. So yeah, a lot of things really did shape me, and as you say, that experience where the doctor said, "I am not going to walk," I was just challenging it, like I'm never going to walk. I've not seen that. Sorry, I just couldn't accept it.
Mm.
And so I left the doctors, and I was like hobbling, and my knee, what you could hear was when I bend my knee, you would just hear the cap chafing on it. It was like,
Ugh.
and it was painful,
Ooh.
really, really painful. It wasn't massively swollen because of, the lack of water, I guess. I don't know really the biology of it all. But then I had a really healing moment because in martial arts that I trained in, it wasn't just like what's the modern movie where they do like the spin-off of Karate Kid. That's a hilarious show. But it's not like that. It's very much Mr. Miyagi. You learn more about the tenets, the principles first before you actually do any of the action. And so you have to know them off by heart. You have to be able to reel them off. And then you learn about meditation. You learn about the energy centers of the body and meditating. And so I took myself to a moment to meditate. And I think it was about 1 week where I pretty much fasted because I all remember I was a student. So all I did was I had tuna and rice. It's just horrible to think of now, but that's what I was having. And that's all I had was just tuna and rice mixed. And I'd have that around between 4 and 6, but I didn't eat anything else. And that was it. And I was meditating for about a week. And I had this absolutely transformational moment where whenever I've explained this, and this is probably the first time publicly, to be fair, um, I would just like see both a mixture of what was above and below and an entire plane of existence. I can't describe it more than fire and water blended together. Water from the top and fire from below, but like it's like you could just in the Matrix where you could just see an endless realm. Anyway, and in this moment, I just felt so emotional coming out of it, out of this meditation. And I didn't even notice that a week later, I wasn't using the crutch to go to lectures. And then I was like, hold on a minute, it's not hurting either. I didn't take that moment as what it was.
Hmm.
That's the main key point. And then I remember that, yeah, within about a week, I didn't need the crutches. I was just doing it as an action, taking them, but it wasn't hurting at all. I remember going to the doctors and he was just like surprised. And this, mind you, this event was between 3 months from diagnosis and accident to that happening, to me deciding to do the meditations and everything else. Because between all that, I'd been osteo, to the physio, and they basically said, look, you're just going to have to do these exercises and get flexion. And I was fed up of it, and hence why that happened. So that transformed me because it just helped me to recognize the importance of that connection and having that connection with what I would call the architect of the entire world as we know it. Um,
Of course, you would call it that.
But rather than, God or anything like that, because you see, the word God to me just is, I grew up in a very Christian household. And to me, Christianity is syncreticism. I don't know if you know that word, but
No.
it's like an amalgamation of all religions.
Right.
Because when the whole thing occurred, with regards to the Council of Nicaea and the Pope, when they first actually announced what they were going to do to create Christianity, it was an amalgamation of, pagan theology and all these other kinds of religions in order to fixate the dates that we have now, the practice, we're back to going to Christmas in this particular recording, right? So, um, people actually would abide to it because it brought lots of things together, and culturally it also brought things together by having certain festivals at certain times, even the respect for uh Valentine's and all these other things that we've slowly introduced. They're all intertwined, so I wouldn't use the word God
No,
because
no.
I understand it for many reasons.
Yeah.
So yeah, these things really formulated the way I went forward with, combination of um, a logical mindset balanced out with a need for having fun and being relaxed, but at the same time in an understanding of how there is a direct connection and a recognition in all of us that we are sentient, and actually the body that we are taught to be really respective of, and only think about the external, um, is actually just a vessel, and the vessel itself is traversing through this sphere, but we're not trapped in it. We give it life through that connection, and that connection gives this body life, and then we're able to have the experience we have here. And so it's through that whenever I've had singular moments like what happened in my divorce, for example, because when I turned up in court, and remember, this marriage had happened through someone I knew for 7 years before we even got together. Then we had 5 years together. And at that divorce, it was like a surprise because I'd come home to find the children gone and the house looked like people had been kidnapped. And I was like, what am I going to do?
Okay, okay. Stop, stop, stop. So I didn't know you had children. Obviously, we've never even got into that kind of conversation.
No, I haven't
Um,
got time.
we haven't got time.
Yeah.
I also didn't realize you'd been married. So you were married till about 31 then, by the sounds of it. Is that
Mm,
right?
yeah, that's right. To about there.
Um, and obviously you've alluded to the fact that she wasn't an honest person.
No, no. I mean, maybe she had been, but definitely not at that time. Definitely not.
So are you good to talk about why on earth you came home and she disappeared?
I'll tell you what, I've given myself the closure I needed. Let's put it that way, because that's never come from in a way that is rational,
Mm,
and is a way that is someone who is um, accountable for their actions more than anything else, you know. So to me, I think you had a really good conversation. I've only watched, I haven't, I'm sorry, I haven't watched many of the videos you've had just because of time.
rude.
I know,
No, I'm
but
joking.
just because of time with what I'm doing and everything else. And we're in a process of, I will hopefully be in a place to sort of sit back and relax and be able to choose, how I spend my time better. But at this present time, life predicates that I have to sort of put forward a lot of action towards what we're doing. So um, I just didn't see that that was be something that would ever happen because
Mm,
she was a very good friend. But now looking back, I know and understand that every individual is either acting in their trauma. And the reason I said that was because I think you had a video with Rob Odek where you discussed that deeply. And I think you've actually talked about it a bit,
yeah,
trauma and things like that. So, you know, we're either acting out of that trauma or in recognition of it and observing our own self subjectively. Yeah. So looking back at ourselves and watching ourselves as to how we interact whenever there are things that may have triggered us from before. And what I see now is that actually we've been through some really, really difficult times, and those times were not easy. And I had this spiritual and intellectual side of me that I could fall back on in those moments where things were difficult. Whereas she didn't have that basis behind her with her upbringing and
yeah,
everything else. So I can, I don't hold any resentment. I don't have any kind of anger or, negative emotions about it now. I mean, I certainly did it. I certainly did not long after. All right, and it was a given that that could happen. I'm in a human body, so typically you would find that people who go through that, those kind of experiences from stillbirth, to having their parents not support them in life generally, to feel negated generally. And then, especially for women, young girls, if they have not had their father in their lives and that support, they'll look to any male figures. And sometimes that will end up being the men that come in their lives. And unfortunately, it means that, they may have had one too many more experiences than they probably would have liked, um, with regards to, because I think I don't think it's biologically proven that, when we give ourselves sexually to a partner, we're actually attuning to their frequency.
mm,
And just like with a job, we have to sort of learn the ropes as to what that particular job wants from you and what's the environment and the culture, and then adapt to that. Imagine doing that many times over. You can end up with so many different experiences, right? But you may not be able to settle in one particular environment, one particular place. And I think that's the same thing if it's overloaded a little bit. If someone doesn't deal with why they're not able to settle, um, and I think that's kind of what happened there. So um, she wasn't satisfied despite the amount of, support she was getting from me. We didn't have it from her family or mine, plus the emotional things that had happened. As I said, stillbirth is a difficult thing to go through for any family, and for partners generally. So I do understand that, but the lies and everything else, I think the system at the time gave her something called the silver bullet method, regularly used. And it's not necessarily just for women, but it is predominantly used by women, whereby they have a fabricated story written by a solicitor, or in the States, be a lawyer. And that story will be to make a very bad picture of the other party. Because in the divorce, usually there's a contest, either the finances or the children, and one party wants one of the other, and sometimes you have one who wants everything, right?
Mm.
So they write that story, they help that story to go to the party who is more likely to be given that parental control. And nowadays, that silver bullet, when it was created, I didn't know existed before that experience.
No.
So it made me catatonic to realize. And I mean, when I say catatonic, I literally couldn't speak. So I was like, I was lost in that court case. I was just watching everything happen. I had a good friend from the posh college who helped me in that experience to sort of navigate what was going on. The judge saw what was going on, and
Must have been like an out of body experience.
yeah, yeah, it's like you're just dumbfounded. I don't know if you know, like, do you know what I mean? Like you're just eyes open. You cannot believe this is happening, and
Yeah.
you can't speak on it because it's not, I never envisioned it, never expected it. And it really took me by surprise. I've never had something like that happen where I just don't know what's hit me.
Yeah.
I've always sort of been able to,
I've always been
right,
prepared.
this might happen.
Mm.
Let me make sure I'm okay. And it was silly because, of course, I'd agreed to move out as well. And it was like, why would you do that at the very last week before I'm going to leave? And we've made plans as to how we're going to care for children and everything else. But she did that because the advice she got meant she'd get a house, she'd get benefits, and she tried to get some money out of me. All of that failed. And I managed to get back to the house because the judge threw everything out.
Oh,
And yeah, that always happens actually. Usually when, cross fingers, touch wood, or whatever. Uh, but no, whenever someone has brought those kind of cases where they've falsely made claims, typically it does never work in their favor. And for, in my situations anyway. So all I do know is that I feel really sad for my children for having had that experience at the hands of their mum and stuff, and then probably having them learn or through her things that are not true. But my son being quite able enough to know better, um, just intrinsically knew, bless him, he's such a strong character. But yeah, these are things that happen, and elevated me more because I just focused more into what it is I do to help others or to offer to the world as a creator, replicator of, that he or she or the energy, that source that we're derived from.
so what were you doing career-wise at this point, aside from obviously the very traumatic experience that you went through with that?
Mm.
What was the day job?
Yeah, so that's it's so funny. So I had applied for a job doing marketing, and prior to that whole experience, she didn't want me to leave to go to that job because it was like we were in Wales, we'd eloped sort of, essentially lived in Wales in the valleys, in the
Mm.
Rhondda, and the job that I'd actually taken out there, um, because prior to that I'd actually been a constructions contractor. I'd started off doing little jobs here and there, painting, landscaping, and things like that. And then I got a job with some other guys doing building. We did a lot of constructions and all that. And then the collapse happened 2008. I kind of taken that on board, and all my experiences meant that I just needed to have other people work with me to complete the jobs that there were. And so I'd done that for a while. And then just before when all of this occurred and we decided we're going to end, my job sort of started to dry up. I sought a job out in Cardiff that she didn't want me to do, but I took it anyway because I knew that if I didn't, there wasn't really a way for me to be able to sort of have a good enough income to sort of still be there for the kids and everything else. And so this job in Cardiff was 100% commission, and it was
Oh.
marketing. And that was the beginning of absolute dedication to a job, because I excelled. I got promoted within about 9 months. So this marketing company, we did door to door. I learned a lot about sales. I learned a lot about NLP, um, and I earned a very tidy income. And when I got promoted, I got moved to London, and I think it was just south of near Gatwick, uh, Horton or something like that. I
Yeah,
can't.
Horton, yeah.
Yeah, so that's where they put us up in a house there, and I had the office. Half of the office was mine and an assistant managers who both of us were running the campaigns, hiring people. So we got trained to hire people. We got trained to train them in the actual sales and develop them into marketing managers. And then we would get trained into writing the sales scripts and also into negotiating the contracts with the companies that they contracted with. The majority of those contracts were with like charities and businesses like British Gas and telecoms and stuff like that. So I learned a lot about developing those skills, and it really did develop me. You know, I give thanks to that company because they did take a big chance. And during the time I was in there, a big shift happened in the way in which marketing like that, especially door-to-door direct marketing, happens. Because they use these kind of skills, these NLP skills, it was sort of seen as slimy. And
Mm,
I remember saying, you know, that's like the worst of the worst, is to come back and have someone who signed on to doing something and then they have buyer's remorse
yeah.
because they realize, oh, I've just fell for that smile or that person's character. I didn't really want this product at all. And so we had to restructure the entire way in which we developed our sales agents and people who were going out so that they learn a new found way and got better retention and hit different kind of KPIs, key performance indicators for those companies who we had contracts with. And so that meant a complete uh, rehaul of how they operated. So we developed a completely new way, which was basically buying through consent. So there was no point with just trying to convince people. Rather, just approach the people, present what it is that you do, and if they were interested, then pitch them. So then that way, we were not wasting time trying to convince someone for the purpose of getting a gain that ultimately never led to a long life gift aid support for a charity or a long life contract with one of these big companies. And I remember that in itself only was successful in the very small team that had where we had been promoted and moved to South London, and it didn't happen in the other big branches, Birmingham, all over the place and all that. So this was a big thing in the papers. That company got shut down and they couldn't feed off our little branch in Croydon that was doing really well because we were getting high retention rates, people who were really super happy with the service, the after service and everything else. And the charities who we'd made so much money for and the companies we made money for. So when it all got done and dusted, I think I bounced around a couple of times because I'd worked at Sky News. I'd worked at different sort of media agencies where I learned a lot about stuff to do with the contracts that they send out for sales or upselling and all that stuff, which to be fair, it doesn't really work. You have to sort of think about whether it's something that's worthwhile for the customer. And then I got trained mainly in a couple of these brokerages that were operating in London. And unbeknownst to me, those companies were not legit as I thought they were. And I probably lasted about 3 months before I just took a day off. And one day I heard actually they've just been shut down. And I was really fortunate for that. But I learned a lot there about the importance of integrating at these places where they, did either investments, because what I think the wine investment company, for example, they were on Sir Alan Sugar's show. They were on the Sir Alan Sugar show, the one where you get
The
fired.
Apprentice, yeah, the
The
Apprentice.
Apprentice, right? Which I auditioned for, by the way.
Did you? I'd thought about doing it myself many years ago, but I never did.
Oh, you never did that?
No, I never did it, no.
Oh my gosh, you wouldn't have liked it. What they
No.
do is they're picking out individuals who essentially fit a bill and have like catchphrases,
Hmm.
That's all they want. They want people who've got catchphrases. They can either look really smart, really clever, or really funny. Funny being stupid funny.
Yeah.
Um, and so that they can get a really good show. Yeah, really good like quotes of stupidity. There is one good guy I think that came out of that who was a bit of an idiot, by the way, but in the way he portrayed himself. But that's a whole other story. I don't remember Stu. His name was Stu. He was like telecoms. He'd done telecoms in the Isle of Wight or Isle of Man.
Yeah, it rings a bell. I'd have to look him up.
Yeah, great guy in terms of what he actually was trying to do. But he got shut down by some of the bigger firms and eventually wound up. Uh, what's the new word for it? Unalived. Yeah. So
Unalived. Oh, okay. That's a new
yeah,
one on me.
yeah.
Well, okay. So I've just noticed the time.
Yes, we have.
And yeah, and we haven't spoken about what you do now. So so listeners and viewers, Patrick can talk. I have realised that over these last 2 months of getting to know him. And there's a lot of detail in what he says, but there's a reason why he gives all that detail because it's really important and it's great for context. But I think I wanted the viewers and the listeners to understand where you've come from, just so they can understand what on earth how you got to where you've got to now. And obviously, it feels like it's very integral to who you were anyway as an individual. From right back in your mother's womb to to who you are today. Um, so from the normal corporate business world to now, what did that look like, and how did it sort of springboard you into having this iRise Academy and platform?
So yeah, that's a good pivotal point because I think in the upcoming book is I talk about from the terrace, from the boardroom to the terrace, which is a
Right.
whole anyway, a
Okay.
theory about helping others having been in a business setting. So
And when you
uh,
say terrace, you mean terraced house?
no, so like in a boardroom, you'll sometimes have one of those floor to ceiling windows, and when you open it doubly, you'll have a small terrace that you can come out onto and
Right.
speak to the people on the street, so to speak, or
Okay.
whatever, see the street. So yeah, anyway, so that's an analogy about going from the boardroom to literally being someone who champions community, maybe not activism, but definitely, as I call it, being a catalyst for change. So I spoke about these marketing places that had trained me in various skills, and I had launched a marketing agency which span from 2011
Mm.
to 2017-ish, and then restarted again in 2020 for a very short time before I started what I'm doing now. But the start of my marketing agency was I saw there was companies out there paying thousands, not getting any results from newspapers, radio, and they were just paying for eyeballs. And when they were paying for eyeballs, they were not getting results. And I was just like, wow, people pay for that?
Mm.
And I'd hated Facebook throughout uni because I didn't want to plaster my face on there and stuff like that. But then I realized that if I didn't get into using it somehow, I would never really understand what was going to happen in the future. And so, being one of those things, I just thought I better grasp some knowledge about. That's what I did. And I found that people would get better results if they got online. And of course, that push for online thing was shamefully, it was kind of us. We did a lot of that. We worked with a lot of companies, um, you know, and in that process though, what I wanted to provide people was basically a return on their investment. And that's what I wanted, was to make sure that those people that were spending money were getting something they could measure to see, well, what I've put in, for every pound I've spent, I've got 2, 3, 4, 5 pounds out of it. And it's actually worked out better for me rather than blindly throwing money away. And so I'd say from that is what I've taken into what I'm doing, because even in 2020, when the COVID thing happened, didn't mean to say the word here, sorry. Um,
That's all right. You could have used candid, scandemic, or anything like
yeah,
that. Would
scandemic. Yeah,
yeah.
it was actually a big experiment, which I'll talk about if you like. It was an experiment. So what I did was we created a online portal where people go online. Instead of being like a normal website, you would actually walk into the store via the site. You would actually be able to move around the store, pick items, view them, get your right measurement, colors, and everything, and then order it. So be like a shopping experience. So it's just like a different way for businesses to sort of position themselves. It was a really good product that we created as a SaaS product, yeah, software. And as I was doing that and running a team, hiring people, in the night, because of what I just experienced in 2020, which was rather traumatic with regards to um, another two children, um, wonderful twins, and had been denied through the family courts to be able to, protect them, safeguard them from abuses, what I'd reported. Anyway, I won't go into details about that, but what I will say is that it was through that really, really difficult time where I realized I didn't know enough about the law, and I didn't know enough. I knew a lot about contracts. I knew a lot about, trust stuff that I'd been learning about for the structure in which I was going to continue my business. Um, but then I realized that this whole silver bullet thing has been going on for years. And obviously, with this whole scenario, they dismissed my evidence, didn't even look at it. And I was just shocked because I'd got the advice from professional agencies and people. And that really made me want to learn more. And if there's anything about me, if I'm going to learn something, I need to put my whole into it.
Hmm.
And that's where I sort of backed up my day job. And in the night, instead of doing any technical web stuff, I was studying lots. Um, and I managed to stop the case. Didn't win it, but I did stop it, because typically in those kind of cases, they try to get people locked up for uh, having some kind of mental incapacity, or they try and imprison them. A lot of people have been wrongfully imprisoned, in my view, where they haven't done anything and the evidence is not substantive, in my opinion. It's not of material substance, and it's just on hearsay. And I learned that the family courts actually have their own law. You know how we have civil procedure rules?
Mhm.
Well, the family court has the family procedure rules. So it's a whole different system. And I learned a lot about that. And through that combination of learning and then applying it in my own personal case by presenting some trust documents, um, prevented the court from really pursuing what I believed was their intention, which I don't think was in the best interests of what I'd intended to do at all. So it's through that I sort of saw a whole plethora. It was like I was seeing a whole world of people that were in pain, struggling. I heard voice recordings of, a woman who reported a partner for indecency to their children, who was now left a voice message that was going around online in Facebook and places like that, crying from a prison, saying, "Help me! I've tried to report this, and now I'm in prison because I've spoken out against it."
Wow.
I saw people who were, committing suicide because of the fact that they had tried to speak out about certain things and were not getting anywhere, whether it was through the charities that are available, which they can't take action because of, the Legal Services Act or stuff like that. So people were speaking but not getting any support, and then that trauma was just replaying in their head, and so they couldn't get out of it except to, unalive themselves. And so this kind of spearheaded me to be like, this cannot go on.
Mm.
If And I'm lucky I've come out of this in a good way. And so I started learning, and I just literally packed in everything I was doing as soon as I learned a couple of key factors within what we know now, which is really about, I think people get presumed to be pseudo legal,
Yeah.
and conspiracy is a nice
Yeah.
word to be used, right?
Had that in a previous court hearing myself, Patrick.
Yeah. um, but I get it. I do get why they use that term. There is some legitimacy, but there's also some ill use of the term. And I mean in a defamatory way. So there is a way in which they use it to defame other people and not being able to express themselves, violating their Article 8 rights. And there's other times where people literally are speaking a lot of nonsense. And so to distinguish between the two, it's really about sitting down and understanding where someone is actually really truly coming from. And I think you won't get that unless you're in front of a well-intentioned, maybe circuit judge. I don't even think below that you'll get that. So it was about understanding it, and especially when, the end of my case, the person I'm accusing is sort of grinning and smiling, saying, "Well, it's not my fault they don't know the law," and grinning, and you're like, "Wow."
Mm.
You've seen those videos of people jumping at the judge or jumping at the person that, that's done the actual wrong, and you think, oh, they're crazy. But it's hard not to sort of feel that way when you're being tied up in a web of stuff that we're not all very aware of what's going on. And so that corporate veil is what I call it, that has hidden agendas, because of course we're not getting access. And I say we, the majority of people that don't or are not given the voice to speak are hidden from the laws openly, for them to actually openly be able to have access to justice, to really be able to assert themselves if they don't have finance to back that up. And typically, most of those people have been through so much that financially they're not even able to go and earn or work on a daily
Right.
basis. And if they're not from a fortunate background, then they just end up being unfortunate in life generally. And so we've seen this, haven't we, in society? You'll see people who are, homeless and, on the streets and stuff, but they've been through very traumatic things. Sometimes they've, been doctors, lawyers, or whatever, and lost everything and not been able to get any support to be able to do the next step or whatever else it is.
Yeah.
And some people who've been abused predominantly are the ones who've gone through it. So now into what we're doing has come from, as I said, starting from the spiritual point of view, has come from the idea that I know that there is no, this whole story of black and white that is perpetuated in the media is done to separate us, first of all,
Yeah.
right? And then we have the separation of classes, and then that also divides people. And all of these divisions are there on purpose to ensure that none of us actually can unite together. And in the trying to bring people together, you'll find the person who's spearheading the bringing people together is always the one who people end up pointing fingers at. And so I've just been underground sort of learning, and I mean under the radar of
Yeah.
learning and helping those who needed access to that knowledge without being a provider of any legal or financial services, ensuring that they have access to that knowledge and can implement what they need to know. And where they've come from groups where they've learned things that are pseudo legal, it's also been a challenge to sort of say, hey, you don't need to hate the system now that you realize certain things like, I don't know, Sesquiv Act of 1669 or Sesquiv Act of 1707 and what its implications mean. But rather, instead of being angry about that, it's better to channel that energy into how you now have the urge, is the word, the sort of, it behoves people to use that energy in a way that is constructive, that enables them to engage in the current system and understand it from a perspective of what actually is impactful. So what I mean by that is where people have discovered, okay, yes, there is some kind of other system operating compared to what's out there that we know of. It's important to not say the system itself doesn't work, but there are some bad people who may be steering that system
Mm.
in a way that isn't for the benefit of the whole. And the reason of that is because they understand that not everyone is open to educating themselves, and not everyone is willing to put the time all day into that because they've also been indoctrinated to be consumers. And
Yeah.
where we've all been indoctrinated to be consumers, we're quick to say, right, I'll pay him for doing that and him for that, and her to do this and get a result. But will I actually get a book, open it, take notes, and educate myself to empower myself with that? I think that's a really important thing, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, no, I do. And what I was thinking while you were talking was my own journey. And there's different people advocating different ways of challenging, right? So you've got the all courts and judges are corrupt, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore the main aim of that is to get the judges to walk out, and the case will eventually be abandoned,
Right.
at some level.
Yeah.
Then you've got the whole I am not my birth certificate, and
Right.
going down that angle. And then and I was doing that. I was like a ping pong ball, looking at all these different ways. And of course, then somebody else's way is going against what you've been doing here, and then you're like, oh my God, what the hell am I supposed to do? Because I'm like a fish out of water. I haven't got the brain for this. They're doing that. They're doing that. They're doing that, and it's all so convoluted. And I think it's not convoluted. It's just it's just different ways that people are taking it. But ultimately, what I've come to realize, and you've got to do what resonates most for you and who you feel resonates most for you and how you actually feel about that person's applications and teachings in light of what your particular challenge is, because everybody's got different challenges. And even if everybody had, even if 10 people had a council tax bankruptcy case, each case is going to be dealt with differently because there was different things that happened in that case. So everyone's looking for the magic pill. Well, oh gosh, like you said, you've had a win, you've had a win. What did you do? How did you do it?
Yeah.
But then it's different to that person's because there was a different set of circumstances, there was different evidence, there was different this, there was different that. So the reason why I'm going on about that is just for anybody that's listening and watching, and if they're feeling that, I think just my own personal opinion and perspective is go within. Um, yeah, try these different things because until you haven't, until you've done it, you don't know.
Yeah.
Um, and you don't know what. I mean, I'm not bad mouthing any of the other ones. You know, they all make perfect bloody sense.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
when you're actually up against an establishment that has been trained a certain way and it ain't in constitutional law, um, then you realise just how difficult particular pathway might be. Um,
A good
go
point
on.
you make there. It's a very good point you make there about the um because I don't want to rubbish anybody else. Okay, I don't want any arrows pointed at me for
Yeah,
saying that actually I'm of a holistic point of view. We talked about what syncretism earlier. You said, "Oh, what is that?" Well, it's the conjoining of many other beliefs together, especially in religion or culture, that makes one pot of new belief, a newfound thing. And I have hopped learning all the different places. I could name them, but I won't. I've learned from all of them that are available. And from my perspective, it was a case of, well, assessing, well, that one works, and why does it work? What is it about what they're doing that works specifically according to the law? And why does this other one work better than the other? And so what I would do is just have an all-round look at what they're doing, and then I essentially jumped because a lot of people also use stuff from the UK, US as well. And I studied all that stuff that they're doing, even in the US, found what is relevant to the UK system and those applicable case law that's here, what exact systems they use here, and then found the basis of, people have said, oh, well, the UK, US is a corporate system, and some have said even the UK is a corporate system. Well, it wasn't until I found conclusively that these facts are true, and at the same time that there is a high importance on investors. We always see on paperwork investors in people, but I don't think people really truly understand what that means. And the investors in people is really all about the mutual funds that are held there that are doing XYZ to gain profit for other corporate institutions, pensions, hedge funds, and so forth. Whilst at the same time, those who are not well educated enough in trade finance and securities will never really be able to peel back and see that on the back of those systems is the debt of the nations on the people themselves. And so I heard you talk, I think that's how we met, was you talking about promissory notes, for
yeah,
example.
yeah,
All of that stuff is really intertwined, into effectively use it. Because I've even heard, I think whoever you spoke to most recently was talking about the fact that, promissory notes can just be used as they are. I'm not disputing that either, but I can't speak on it because I haven't done it in that particular way. And I think even when I've addressed it to you, I was saying, well, for there to be strength in how people do things, there needs to be a knowledge of what actually works, not just to enforce it, but what backs it up. And we need to understand what trade finance does. How important is it that we have um, a securities market that is fundamentally managed by the Securities Exchange Commission, despite the new law that just came in 2021 here in the UK with the management of securities and how they're done. Really, really new. And the way in which things are being shifted with the new quantum financial system so that everything becomes more digital. And why is it that we have an issue within the country, not just this country but globally, if you look at every country, an immigration issue? Why do we have that issue? Well, we can look at naturalization. Yeah, we can look at that SESQV act, and sort of combining all of these elements together and understanding finance and understanding the importance of the international trade laws that exist as to why. that's important for a corporate nation or a corporate entity. And that in itself, one uncovers those things. You have to obviously operate in the private to understand the balance sheets that that helps you to understand why it's important for such institutions to be able to manage their balance sheets. Now, it sounds like I'm waffling without giving direct information, and I know that that's exactly what it sounds like. I'm dancing around, jumping in the pool, right? I'm not actually jumping in the pool. And there's a reason for that, because I know this is very public. And the thing is, once I say a few things, there's not much left to reveal, and it's almost too public. But at the same time, you've probably watched, documentaries with people talking about how the bank makes money and how, it's never really using your deposit to lend to someone else, but it's fractional reserve lending. And through that system alone, and understanding that, yes, sterling silver is no longer in existence, but if you look at the freedom of information that was requested, I think probably back in 2018, it was confirmed again by the Treasury themselves, that, of course, the history of banking here in the UK specifically, securities and the management of such things is relatively not as well regulated as it is in the States, because the States were founded by pretty much lawyers. And I can go into a whole history of why and how that was all founded. But what I'm trying to get at is the fact that the money we use, it says promise to pay on it. And that money that it says promise to pay, it is a promissory note, but it's no longer backed on silver or gold, but rather securities. And that is in a freedom of information document by the Treasury. And as such, it would behoove people to understand more about securities themselves. And
Hmm.
that's what I'm getting at. And so securities does involve things like UCC1. But again, um, that is something that is used by the banks specifically from their parent companies in the States who are doing all of the things. And I think when you understand all of that and the trust relationship between the entities of those companies that are their parent companies and the ones here, you start to actually begin to unravel the fact that those laws are applicable. It's just not in the way people who are defamed by words like conspiracy theorists and pseudo legal are using them. They're just misapplying them. And so they need to understand what that is so that they can actually uh, claim the credit that they're worthy of in order to be able to execute financial things in a much more structured way that will be recognized by 5 different professions, from legal, tax, financial, regulatory officials, brokers, and all the like of estate planning as well. So all of this is important, and it does take a good time to understand that information, especially if you've never studied in a long time. But if you're able to, then great. And if you do want to prevent yourself from being an anarchist, like, and I'm not calling the people, everyone on the street, an anarchist, right? Like the farmers, for example. It's really intriguing that the government spokespeople said, well, what the farmers need to do is organize themselves. What did they mean? Well, they were talking about the organization of their legacy, estate planning, and what they need to do in order to do that effectively and not be taxed. Pensioners being taxed highly. Why are they being taxed so highly? Who is it benefiting? Maybe that's not as important as how can they prevent themselves from having such high inheritance tax or high pensions, high taxes on their pensions that they've already been taxed on. And it's really about understanding that so that you know what method best suits you to implement. And that's essentially how we're sort of empowering people to then come together with what they've established, whether it be properly formulated trust documents that are legally approved, that they can now influence through investment in their communities to make a massive change. And together we can do that, because that's when the power really is in the people,
Mm.
as opposed to the belief that the power is in the people when Parliament has taken the sovereignty away through a number of contractual things that occurred, in the Maggie Thatcher years. So um,
I think I
that's,
think
yeah,
I think in simple terms, and we haven't even got on to the level of trust that me and you are going to talk about. So
yeah,
so a lot of people have got private trusts now in place, which tend to just be asset protection, right? Me
mm,
being one of them, and some are better than others, and all of that kind of thing.
mm-hmm,
And Patrick is very much about, I think you said it's six trusts within a trust. You know, you are basically not only protecting your assets, you're protecting yourself, your sovereignty, dealing in the public and the private. I don't know enough to talk about this intelligently right now. And me
mm,
and Patrick haven't had the time to fully go into it properly because there's just been so much stuff going on. But it is something that I am going to do next year. And it also allows you to then, and I know there's another company that does this and you pay quite a bit of money for, which I'm part of as well. Um,
mm.
but it does allow you to become your own private banker. That's right, isn't it? And
Ah, I know the company you're talking about. Okay.
yeah,
Okay. See, I always condone people having done their due diligence.
yeah,
And one of those would be to say, okay, one thing that is happening within the group of people that I'm, assisting is probably by the time this video goes out, they will definitely have what they need to, operate and navigate the world in a much more convenient way and recognize professionally, financially, legally, right? So they're in the private, but their businesses can operate publicly. And so, of course, the way in which they're going to be able to do that, it's a bit different to maybe exactly saying it's six trusts in a trust. The trusts themselves are, not necessarily all completely related, but they have beneficiaries maybe to them that are intrinsic to following trust law, but give the grantors of such trusts um, the ability to minimize the tax that they would be liable for, based on the way in which that they have structured everything. So it's just basically a complex trust structure,
mm,
hybrid trust structure that is used by the elites. Essentially, people talk about the Rothschild trusts and the vanguards of people who started doing that kind of trust formulation. It's important that the intention behind it is specifically for asset protection and not to get, using terminology that could be seen as either a sham trust or a trust that's there just for the purpose of hiding money. Um, for us to really give people true empowerment, it means that we have to prioritize, their understanding of who the beneficiaries of those trusts are, and the objects of what's going in those trusts. So in terms of doing it, it does mean there has to be an understanding of cross-border um, financial implications, tax implications, but also how to maneuver when it becomes staying maybe in the UK and still doing things. Does that mean, for example, I might need a foreign trustee? That may well be very important, these kind of things come into play. But where people would normally, do this kind of thing, they're usually people who are coming from the mindset of being high net worth already. And
mm,
so why I say the course that we do is transformational is actually giving people a bit of an understanding of coming in from where they are, where maybe they have a poverty mindset, a survival mindset. We go from money in hand to mouth quickly, rather than, understanding the division of that money coming in being split into savings pots and investments, and how to use it correctly, so that when you are in that position of high net worth, because no one wants to be a millionaire today without understanding finance. Trust me, it's probably the worst thing that could happen, is to be really financially well off and be poor within a year or two.
Mm.
So that part is very, very key. And then also it's about responsibility and accountability, and understanding how to actually do all of that without being in a position where you've not been told anything. And like the company you mentioned, they'll just give you or promise they're going to do that for you. But then there's implications of that, which means you then don't know what you're just getting something. You think you're safe, but you don't know how to actually operate. You still need someone who's going to guide you through what to do and how to use everything in combination. And you still need to really, really understand what are the implications if what if my future plans are set XYZ. So with a dynasty trust, for example, where you're planning for 100 years or 125 years, whatever the maximum term of that trust is, you might want to think about all of the things that may be of benefit to those beneficiaries of that trust. And, the offsetting of tax liabilities that you can use as tax credits, can only be done through corporate agencies to the trust, trustees that you've assigned to be to be trustees in a corporate capacity. And of course, they can offset things like that. Um, and again, this isn't advice, but this is from my knowledge, and it's always educational. And I'll literally provide you the real life examples of the types of people who are doing that now, public facing wise, and in the private. And like I said, most people, if they were to access this kind of information, or because I don't think it's taught unless you go to specialist universities or specialist courses, professional courses, of which there's probably a threshold of knowledge needed before you go into them. Because I studied with the London School of Bank and Finance just before 2020, thinking, oh, I'm going to change everything I'm doing, because my marketing agency, when it was had been shut down and I wanted to restart it up, we'd worked with over 150 different types of industry, or niches, if you like, of business. And so we bought at least 150 domains. And one of the really profitable ones that we've done was in the financial field, providing leads for financial companies, be they payday loans, bridging finance, or sort of asset finance companies, that kind of thing, non-regulated places before, until they became regulated, of course. And then those things there actually showed me, if everything I'm doing is to gain money, why don't I just study about money? And then that's where that whole thing came in. So I did the whole mortgage advice course. And then I realized, when I delved a bit deeper than what they gave me information, the meaning of what mortgage is, why that probably is not something I want on my conscience to have given to others in a certain way. And essentially, it was from that I really found out a lot of the things I ended up finding out.
Mm.
So yeah, it's quite complex, but I would say it doesn't take people. It's worth, if it's going to change your entire life, I would say personally, I would give up 6 months or a year of my life to get into that knowledge, than to sort of wander around and hope I find a golden nugget that will solve everything.
Yeah.
Because you do need to learn it and then be able to use it for the rest of your life. It's going to change everything, you know.
Yeah. and you've really honed that into me in terms of that importance and where I'm going to go in the future. You know, we're armed with this knowledge, etc., etc. So before we hit record, you said there was a couple of things you were going to talk about, and I'm very conscious that this has gone on a bit longer than probably we imagined. But um,
It has, yeah.
are you still happy to
Um,
talk about that? Is it quite a
I
concise
can't think
thing?
what I was saying. So,
You
no, it
said,
was just related to what you were saying before, because I said the word and you said, no, it's probably better to use convid or something else, right? And I was like, oh, yeah, it's crazy, right? But it's all interrelated. So, we're moving from a position where money, as we know it, the banks are operating in a certain way to meet certain criteria that was set maybe 2, 3 years ago. So, there's something called the Basel 3, and we're going into the Basel 4 Accord, which actually is a Basel 3.2. Anyway, what I'm saying is they're becoming a little bit more regulated in a different way, going into the quantum financial system, highly likely to be in effect by April, beginning of April, and maybe even the year after if it's too quick for most of the banks to catch up. And what that means is everything's becoming digital. That's why we've seen a regulation decrease in money and everything else. But then when we look at everything, why is everything being more digital? We've got more AI replacing people in work and everything like that. There's some striking things that are happening at this present time. We've had that 2020. I was actually struck off Facebook before 2020 because I was talking about things I don't think Facebook wanted on there. Um, and then Facebook tried to pretend it wasn't anything important that I was talking about at all. It was just because I'd forgotten my password, which is a load of rubbish, yeah,
yeah,
because I could just easily set that password, but it kept sending me round and round. I'd email them, they wouldn't do it. It took years before, I think it was at least 3 to 4 years I wasn't on there. And all the stuff I'd been posting, I just went berserk and started posting more stuff, right? um, anyway, my point is the stuff I was posting was to do with that convid thing. And as well, so these things that I posted was just to warn and preempt family and friends and say, hey, you do realize that what they're calling COVID 19 SARS is essentially just the mucus in the body. That's what's been called all this time. But what they're projecting and what they always do is create a problem, create a solution. I'm sure you talked about it in the last one, right? And so that issue, the reason why it became an issue was because it became an experiment that was being tried on the peoples. Not the first, there were many recorded over history and time
yeah,
I could go into, but this particular one was really about um, us being the experiment. And so those who took that, unfortunately, I can't say it with a smile because it has caused a lot of grief for people. And there are MPs who are advocating for people to, who we've talked to that we're partnering with to say, yeah, you should make sure you get your claim for any damage you've had from that jab. And it's important to make those claims quickly. But it's becoming a set precedent in some of the states of the US, in, I believe, Europe. There is at least one country, from what I understand, that is also taking action against these companies because they understand that the experiment was very detrimental. And what they found in the most recently published data, in fact, I think there was something that came out just in the last week, whereby if it's not Thailand, forgive me, but it's a country near enough to Thailand that got found out that 95 million citizens or something like that had been exposed to essentially metals within themselves and earth minerals that should never be in the body that essentially are what they're finding the secret ingredient for both Vi's. What's the other three companies? I'm trying to
Moderna.
say it. There you go. Those ones. The three main companies. There is another two that I didn't know existed that are included in these findings, where lanthanodes was found. Lanthanodes are earthbound materials that are used in cell phones. And cell phones obviously emit a certain frequency in order to be in touch with the whole everything. And if you know that that's also in the investment, the trade finance, okay? So there's people behind that, investing behind that as to why it's continued up until now. And of course, with the combination of all the two, the money creation and that convid, and the combination of the experiment as a whole, what it is proof of is where we've all been called conspiracists about, you know, the name being the fraud, so to speak, or the fact that there is some kind of treasury account and da, 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 da. These things are predominantly called that for the purpose of, you know, defaming people who have that opinion. But what's occurring right now is another proof of a reset into a new way, because you're already aware that in 2015, you can look in any newspaper, the tax of all the people did pay off those who were the owners of either slave ships or slave owners. And of course, since 2015, there's been a great agenda to recapitalize and reset the balance sheets so that they can now move forward into the future. And that's actually all been incorporated within this new system, whereby, of course, we ourselves physically will be easily integrated into the Web 2.0 or 3.0, if you like, literally by our facial recognition, by the actual DNA that, of course, would have changed through the mRNA, and of course will now be combined into this entire system. So your face would recognize on the phone, but it would also pay for things, and AI would know when you want things and don't want things. That's why we have adverts that come at a certain time just by thinking it. So what I'm saying is singularity is here, and that's happening quite quickly, and it'll be in people's best interest to really study and understand what's happening around them. That's my point.
Well, some people's brains have just exploded, Patrick. Uh, because I mean, we know it's big. We know that the dots go far and wide. But to bring it into such a way, you've just summarized that there in terms of the money versus the technology versus the pharmaceuticals versus all of that. And yeah, it is mind blowing. So, very conscious of the time.
Yes.
Right. Where can people find you when if they want to reach out and find out more about your education and what you do?
Well, we have got a website. It's www.irise.academy. There probably by the time of this book, by the time of this video being going out, there will be a book that people can also get.
From
And
boardroom to terrace.
there we are. It'll include all of that from boardroom to the terrace for sure. And it will have all the information I've kind of maybe experienced and have knowledge in, with more versed guidance on maybe how to approach matters and things like that that you may have an issue with. We're actually formulating as an NGO, and all the other commissioned services like the academy itself is spiritually based in the sense that it's seeking to be non-profit, but obviously it's a payment by membership. Where there's anything to do with trust and all of that, I will open up maybe a link that you can share with your viewers,
Mhm.
and they can actually access that for a discounted fee. But I guess that would be something that they could come through you. through, because we're only doing a set number of people. We can't, we can't manage a large number of people at a time.
Yeah.
And so, of course, in those small numbers, we'll open up a few pockets that you can give to people as well. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah. If people want to contact me either through mail directly or come to our site and drop us a message.
Okay. Cool. And I highly recommend it. Anyone that's listening, where this is resonating for them. Patrick does know a lot of stuff. Some of it goes right over my head, but a lot of it, Patrick has a way of explaining, talking weird stuff, but then backing it up with context in simple terms. So you go, oh, okay, right, got you. Oh, yeah, okay, got you. That's my experience anyway of working with Patrick. So, if you are a classic spiritual, right-brained creative who's a bit airy-fairy, and this kind of stuff feels like it's above you, it doesn't have to be. It really doesn't. And empowering yourself is with the right knowledge and the right support and the right people around you is invaluable. I'm not just in Patrick's world. I have other people that I've worked with over the last few months and support and help and just an amazing community. So, Patrick, thank you very much because I know how busy you are in terms of how much time we've spent today.
Mm-hmm.
I always like to wrap these conversations up with anything you feel called to share before we finish.
Anything I feel called to share.
In less than 2 minutes.
I love to. I have nothing major except to say, look, we bring all this information to people to empower them, and I think it's very important that whenever you're approaching anything, approach it with your heart and your mind open, and so you can actually really assess it for what it is. So I don't really pitch what we've done. We've never marketed. And again, I think stay open-hearted, stay light, don't get too engrossed in the news, and yeah, keep questioning what's behind the veil,
Yeah.
and take action in
Yeah,
order to feel empowered.
absolutely. Well, thank you again, sir. It's been a privilege to get to know more of your story on this Friday afternoon. And I know the viewers are going to get a lot of value from it. So thank you very much.
I hope so. Thank you. Thanks for your time.